So welcome everyone to the Prairie Symposium for the Common Good. My name is Daniel McLeod. I'm the director of the Jesuit Center for Catholic Studies at St. Paul's College at the University of Manitoba, and we're proud to be here today to be partners in this event, and it's my pleasure to briefly introduce Sister Dawn's lecture this evening. And before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to take a few moments to introduce you to our center, the Jesuit Center at St. Paul's, and to the Ayotte family, the sponsors of this event. The Jesuit Center is a teaching and research center at St. Paul's College. It's dedicated to the examination of the culture, history, and intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church. It was established in 1989 by Father David Kramer, S.J., and building on the legacies and contributions of Father Kramer, Father John Perry, and other Jesuits. It built a good reputation over the years for rigor, for creativity, for service, and for academic excellence. And in this work, it influenced many students, including Dr. Horenko, who's here today at Thomas More, Father Jeff Burwell from Campion College, the incoming provincial of the Jesuits in Canada. From 1989 to 2024 marks 35 years of work for our Jesuit Center, and 35 years I always think is a long time for a center like ours to exist on a public, secular university campus. So we continue to be proud of the work that Jesuit Center does as we look forward to a future that is hope-filled. Our center hosts the largest, houses the largest Catholic Studies program in Canada. We teach courses to roughly 400 students per year, and the center hosts academic talks and public lectures throughout the academic year. We help form students who go on to careers in nursing, in law, in education, in medicine, in business, and we're proud of our small but mighty center, and we're happy that with the larger community from St. Paul's, we can participate in this symposium, which has kind of been one of our babies over the last number of years. And the work of our center would not be possible without the contributions of our donors who work with the St. Paul's College Foundation to fund much of our work. And this evening I'd like to make particular note of Brian and Jed Ayotte, two brothers and graduates of St. Paul's who sponsored this lecture as part of the Ayotte Fund for the Study of Faith and the Environment, which also helps sponsor a course in ecology at our college and a student prize. Brian and Jed were educated by the Jesuits in Winnipeg and have taken this education seriously. They devoted much of their lives to the service of other people and of their communities in British Columbia, where they lived and worked. Brian as a physician and Jed in prison ministry. In 2019, they contacted their alma mater, St. Paul's, interested in starting a fund that would address the church and ecology amidst the growing crisis of climate change. Like many Catholics, Brian and Jed were moved by Laudato Si and hoped to make a positive influence in the communities that they loved. Like many of our donors, the Ayottes could have done just about anything with their money. They could have saved it for themselves. They could have gone on vacation. They could have bought a sandwich, several sandwiches probably. But they didn't, and what they did do was they considered the places and ideas and faith communities that meant a great deal to them, and they facilitated the work in those communities that might improve the world around them. They acted like the good and virtuous men that St. Ignatius hoped to form when the Jesuits were first became involved in education in the middle of the 16th century. And one thing I think is particularly noble about these two men and their families is their openness to the larger sense of solidarity that this kind of work can build. They insisted from the beginning that the fund be devoted to perspectives that were ecumenical and interfaith and in tune with the world, a lesson that would surely make their Jesuit teachers proud all these years later. And it should also be noted that some donors might balk at the suggestion that a St. Paul's College lecture that they funded was being offered here in Saskatoon, but Brian and Jed didn't even blink when I asked them. Of course, they said. This is about the issue. And they were particularly enthused to hear the topic of Sister Dawn's lecture this evening. I know they will be first in line to view the lecture when a recording becomes available. So it is with great gratitude and with pride that as a representative of St. Paul's College and of the Jesuit Center, I can recognize these two very good men who are rooted in the best things and dedicated to the best things as well, and who have made tonight possible. So perhaps we could give a hand to them in their absence. Now, to introduce our lecturer, Sister Dawn Nothwehr, Professor of Catholic Theological Ethics and the Erica and Harry John Family Endowed Chair in Catholic Ethics at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. A Sister of St. Francis, Sister Dawn's academic career exemplifies the tremendous breadth, a career of tremendous breadth and interest and skill. Her accomplishments are too many to mention, but you know, let's give it a try. In 2017, she received the Franciscan Federation's Inspiration for the 21st Century Award for her contribution to Franciscan theological education. She was also honored among 25 eco-theologians in the United States heartland by the National Council for Churches of Christ Eco-Justice Programs as a leading Catholic environmental ethicist. Dr. Nothwehr served in the National Board of the Catholic Theological Society of America as convener of its Moral Theology section and as co-convener of its Women's Consultation and Constructive Theology, and as a co-convener of the Environmental Ethics and Theology section of the Society for Christian Ethics. Dr. Nothwehr contributed to the New Theology Review, Catholic Theological Union's peer-reviewed journal, as editorial board member, as editor, as a co-editor, and she has directed CTU's DIV and MAPS degree programs and certificates in healthcare and healthcare mission leadership. In 2023, she published Franciscan writings, Hope Amid Ecological Sin and Climate Emergency. This is a busy woman. Like many of the best thinkers in our church, Sister Nothwehr's work exemplifies a keen understanding of the interconnectedness at the heart of relationships. She researches environmental ethics, of course, but also how ethics of power influence racial justice and fundamental moral theology. She recognizes, as Pope Francis always reminds us, that it's all connected, and her work teaches us to conceive of relationships in new ways. At its heart, though, her work is rooted in Franciscan theology, and that charism, singular approach to understanding the relationship between the earth, its creatures, and those left at its margins, the poor. What a treat, then, it is for us tonight to hear from Sister Dawn as she takes us on a journey to the 13th century to tell us about what those relationships can tell us about our relationships now. Welcome, Sister Dawn.
Well, it's really my pleasure to be with you, and all the different presentations that I've experienced since being here. You know, I hate to give you another one at this hour, but here we go. I am going to start in maybe a little bit of an unusual way, so I'll explain that just shortly. But before I do that, I just want to say this, that my community, my Franciscan community in Rochester, Minnesota, is really just beginning on a major journey of reconciliation with both Indigenous peoples who have their homeland at some different point in history on the land that our mother house is now built upon. And so in that spirit, why we have begun to look at, through our own Franciscan charism, Francis of Assisi having been a preeminent peacemaker and also the patron of ecology as of this more recent century. And so following his example, why we've begun a process of reconciliation with our Dakota neighbors, grounded in a real genuine desire for trying to move with integrity and reverence at something that is a real treasure, and that's our Creator's earth. But we also know that we have to do the similar kind of work with our Ho-Chunk neighbors, because the same at different periods of history, that same land was also their homeland, but in a very different way. So tonight's presentation is going to involve a lot of history, and I hope that you like history, because I think it reveals to us a real important perspective for our own lifetime. So in my presentation, first of all, I'm going to show a couple of video clips that, first of all, will show us the place that I'm talking about. We had a drone take a little trip around the whole area, both our own motherhouse area and then the wider property. And then I'm going to show you, again in silence, a short clip that shows how what is known as the United States government basically took over the homeland of most indigenous peoples in that part of the North American continent. And so I'd like to have that be kind of an opening sort of meditation for us. Then I'm going to move to give you some background of the foundation of the Rochester Franciscan community, and then focus in a little more carefully on the actual location of it. Then I want to kind of, because just the time we can't do both history of Lakota and the Ho-Chunk, I'm going to focus with the Dakota because we've had more meetings with them and we're further along in our process with them. Finally, just look at what we have done with the reconciliation process, using the spirituality of Francis of Assisi and in the spirit of the model of reconciliation with the Muslim Al-Malik al-Kāmil. And hopefully by then we'll be able to understand how, using the indigenous peoples' language of a good way, our values and vision really move in a nice, compatible way, so that we've been able to have some dialogue. So just for the first video is about 4 minutes, and the other is about a minute. So I'm going to show those to you, all the technology working, right? Just kind of in silence, so just to take get some background for where we're going. So you see how the homeland was lost. So now I'd like to give you a brief history of the foundation of my community. The Sisters of St. Francis, Rochester, Minnesota, is a Roman Catholic congregation of women religious founded in 1877 by Mary Catherine Mose, who immigrated to the U.S. from Luxembourg in 1850. She was raised in a strong Catholic family amid a huge political set of changes that took place in Luxembourg in that period. Mary Catherine was drawn in by the church's missionary fervor of doing ministry in the United States where, quote, there were Native American souls to be saved, unquote. Though she never personally ministered among the Native Americans, doing soul saving was a real significant focus for the Catholic Church of the day, and along with other desires for political freedom, economic opportunity, and especially land ownership. Now, sadly, in 1851, prior to Minnesota achieving statehood in 1858, the territorial representatives Alexander Ramsey and Henry Sibley negotiated the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux with two bands of the Dakota, swindling them out of 24 million acres of land for the U.S. That activity never was acknowledged as an evil because over the next decade, some 100,000 white arrivals took up residence on that land, literally going home shopping in Minnesota. Then in 1862, President Lincoln signed what was known as the Homestead Act, offering 160-acre parcels of federal land to any person who would build a home and a farm on a plot and farm the plot for 5 years. Some 75,000 prospective Minnesotans accepted the deal. By agreeing to farm a plot of land for 5 years, each received 160 acres from the U.S. government. Fast forward another 10 years or so, in 1877, sorry about that, I'm going to get rid of that. In 1877, that was especially significant for the development of the Minnesota Territory. Catholic Bishop John Ireland, who was stationed in St. Paul, and it was the only Catholic diocese was the St. Paul Diocese at that time, contracted with railroad baron James J. Hill for another 100,000 acres of land in southwestern Minnesota. Bishop Ireland recruited especially poor Catholic, Irish, and German farmers to settle the rich land. In St. Paul, Minnesota's capital, this committee drew up contracts that stipulated, 1, there would be no down payment. 2, interest was paid the second year. 3, full payment was required in the third year. And in the fourth, then the land was distributed. The bishop's loftier goal was to settle the pristine land with Catholics. Regrettably, no one again recognized that the land being offered was the homeland of the Dakota people. In 1877, that same year, Mary Catherine Mose, now a Franciscan sister, founded the Sisters of St. Francis, Congregation of Our Lady of the Lord in Rochester, Minnesota, and then became known as Mother Alfred. When in 1883 a deadly tornado ravaged the Rochester area, the sisters cared for the sick and injured. And subsequently, Mother Alfred built St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, and she staffed it with the now famous Doctors Mayo, William Worrell, William Jr., and Charles. St. Mary's Hospital opened on September 30 of 1889. The Franciscans also established elementary and high schools, and then in 1894, they opened the College of St. Teresa in Winona, Minnesota, serving the growing Catholic migrant communities. Now we're going to fast forward about 100 years to 1952, and this is an aerial view off of Google Maps you might recognize. And you'll notice those red tile roofs and then the forested area at the right. The U.S. post-World War II economic prosperity was unprecedented. The The GI Bill benefits enabled the next generation of those earlier poor Irish and German Catholics to attend college, to send their children to Catholic schools, to build new churches, and to establish businesses. Eventually, the Rochester Franciscans, now numbering near 1,000 members, outgrew their humble mother house that was 75 years old or so at the time. So providentially, the 40-acre, I'm going to go back, that 40-acre plot of land that you see right in this area of the map, that property was owned at this point by one of the doctors that had joined the Mayos, and this was a 25-acre apple orchard and 7 acres of woods that became available for purchase. And the property had been annexed then by the city of Rochester, so it had the services of water and sewer systems. But again, no one recognized that this property abutted the Sacred Dakota ceremonial site. Get this back on. So now I want to say just a few things about the history of the Dakota people. The pre-contact history is long and rich. Prior to the European invasion, the 4 Dakota bands were the keepers of the eastern door of the great Lakota, Dakota, Nakota nation. Located in Minnesota and western Wisconsin, the Dakota lived for countless generations along the wooded shores of the region's lakes and rivers. They harvested wild rice, maple syrup, and also cultivated gardens. They were a semi-nomadic people, spending most of the year in villages and bark longhouses. The Dakota were a matrilineal society with a complex set of kinship laws and a village clan system. Each village was autonomous and had its own chief. The village chiefs then elected a speaker of the nation who represented the people in all formal settings. Next came the period of contact and treaties. From the early 1600s, the French fur traders engaged the Dakota as sources for their business. And in the following century, the fur trading became the primary occupation of the Dakota people. With the influx of the Europeans, a booming industry, and increase in guns use in the area, food sources became strained. Hostile competition became a regular issue with the Anishinaabe, the neighboring people, and the Dakota. And throughout the 17th century, or 1700s rather, the missionaries increased their presence in the region. And the British dominated the area and negotiated several treaties with the Dakota. And the Dakota language, which was an oral tradition, then got an alphabet and was given a writing capacity. By the 1800s, the U.S. signed treaties with the Dakota, setting off only small portions of land, removing them away from their ancestral territories. As already noted, in 1851, with the diminished food resources and increased hostilities and outright deception, the Dakota chiefs had little choice but to sign another treaty in 1851, ceding all land in Minnesota except for 2 strips of land on the Minnesota River. And I'll just point that out here. Here's the Minnesota River, and it's this darker brown area here. That's what we're talking about. And prior to that, they had pretty much all this other area that had been their homeland. Okay, the next piece that took place was in 1862. With the Dakota restricted to the Minnesota River Reservation, the U.S. created the Upper Sioux, and I want to comment on, right before I continue, the word Sioux is a derivative off of the French language, and it's considered by the Dakota as a kind of a derogatory term. But you're going to hear me say that all over the place because that's the way things are named. So it's not my intention to be that derogatory. Okay, so this portion of land then was very narrow, And the Dakota were restricted to that area as a reservation. And the U.S. Then, within that property or that land, they created the Upper Sioux and Lower Sioux agencies to administer, control, and assimilate the Dakota. But the U.S. breached the terms of the treaty, failing to provide food and services promised. Local traders refused to give out food from their stores. With rampant disease, failing crops, and starvation threatening, the Dakota people revolted against the U.S., and the War of 1862 began, led by Chief Little Crow. The villagers split on the war. Christian converts objected to it, helping the local farmers escape, and others started attacking the local towns and the region, especially the military post Fort Ridgely, which was located on the Minnesota River, and that was the military post that was supposed to control things. Over 2 months of fighting, the Dakota began losing the war. Thousands of women, children, and elders fled Minnesota. The war ended on December 26, 1862, with the largest mass hanging in U.S. history, and that's that center picture. 38 Dakota warriors were executed in Mankato, Minnesota. The state of Minnesota then proclaimed all Dakota people illegal within its boundaries. Thousands of Dakota sought political asylum in Canada. 1,200 Dakota women and children were force-marched 120 miles to a concentration camp at Fort Snelling near St. Paul, Minnesota. Hundreds died in the camp from starvation and disease. Survivors were shipped by boat to the Crow Creek Reservation in South Dakota. The Canadian refugees settled in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Countless others migrated to South Dakota and joined the Western Lakota Band. Having objected to the war and chosen to adopt European standards of living, a handful of Dakota remained in Minnesota, protected by white farmers and missionaries. In 1889, the federal government granted land allotments to those descendants of these remaining families. Today, those allotments are Dakota reservations. In 1865, Dakota leader Sakape, he had escaped to Canada, but he was extradited by Canada to the United States and was hung at Fort Snelling. Now we fast forward to 1972. Clearly, the post-World War II prosperity had not reached most people of color in the United States, especially indigenous peoples. Thus, from the late 1960s through 1970s forward, there was a significant rise in social justice movements in the United States. The American Indian movement, known as AIM, A-I-M, led a major breakthrough that began with the tragic events of 1973. From February 27 to May 1973, members of AIM occupied the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Reservation. On February 27, some 200 Ogallala Lakota, led by members of AIM, took control of the Pine Ridge Reservation village, which you may recall was the site back in 1890 when there was a massacre, when U.S. troops killed as many as 300 Lakota men, women, and children. Activists protested the corruption of the tribal leadership and highlighted the U.S. government's failure to honor Native treaties. The U.S. Marshals Service called these 71 days the longest civil disorder in its history. AIM co-founder Dennis Banks cited poverty and police brutality as two of the driving forces behind the movement. He asserted, quote, "People are in the gutter and they want to get up. They want to do something. They were desperate," unquote. Before negotiations with the protesters, federal authorities descended on the reservation, where they exchanged gunfire, later admitting to firing some 500,000 rounds. They killed Frank Clearwater and Lawrence Buddy Lamont, and wounded and arrested many others. Activists ultimately surrendered on May 8, after officials promised to investigate their complaints. While the violence made all the headlines, these events grew to signify much more. The real story was the religious ceremonies that took place. Wounded Knee became a kind of laboratory for the hundreds who came there in getting their religion back and learning some of their language. These experiences led to a revival of these major two components that are the core of Indigenous identity: language and religion. Indeed, the Wounded Knee occupation left behind a nuanced legacy. Congress took no major steps to remedy broken treaties. But ironically, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in 1980 that it owed, and here's where the derogatory language starts coming, owed the Sioux money for taking the land a century earlier. But the tribe has not accepted that compensation, which is now valued at $2 billion. In the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, the U.S. pledged that the Great Sioux Reservation included the Black Hills, which would be, quote, set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians, i.e. the Dakota. The Black Hills, known to the Dakota people as the Pahasapa, is a spiritual equivalent of the Christian Holy Land. However, the Sioux Nation tribes, the Dakota, have never relinquished ownership of the Black Hills, have never accepted payment for illegal taking of it, nor have the tribes ever agreed to sell the Black Hills to the United States. To this day, the Sioux Nation, the Dakota people, continue to fight for this sacred land as part of their sovereign native nations. The Pine Ridge occupation drew international attention to the federal government's repeated injustices against Native Americans and infringements upon their sovereignty. It helped energize a movement for Indigenous rights. Other gains included legislation at the federal level, was known as the Indian Freedom of Religion Act. Remember, they couldn't even be in Minnesota before, okay? The Indian Child Welfare Act, which means that the Native people's children that needed particular care would go to other of their same Indigenous people if they needed extra care from others. And then Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, again, the violations of sacred burial sites and so on. So all of these things then it's just part of the story. So especially for us, the Wounded Knee events finally awakened the recognition by the city of Rochester, Minnesota, to the buried Nakota and Ho-Chunk history. For the first time, many Rochester citizens began to understand that even after several millennia, this 36.4-acre hill and forest that abuts Assisi Heights, as you saw in the video, is still revered as sacred to the Dakota peoples. In late 1973, the city of Rochester bought the land to preserve it, igniting a journey of discovery. Sadly, prior to this, most of the land had been desecrated in terms of the burial sites. So this was an effort, but too little, too late. Then in 2010, a citizen steering committee was formed to define the purpose and to protect the burial sites located at what's known to the common people as Indian Heights. Despite the controversy, this park's story signals efforts to honor the Dakota heritage and to preserve the sacred sites for future generations. In the spring of 2023, however, finally, we, the Sisters of St. Francis, began preparations for extending an official gesture, seeking a more thoroughgoing process of reconciliation with the Dakota peoples. because, quote, our property abuts and crosses the sacred Indian Heights forest land, we recognize a particular responsibility for reconciliation. Our justice seeking must certainly deal with more than real estate, but land recognition is an important initial gesture of concern. Ultimately, we desire to have a deeper healing of relationships through active, thoroughgoing engagements of mutual respect and care for common causes. Now I'm going to move to what we reflected on as Franciscan sisters. So we'll begin with the story of the Francis and Malik al-Kāmil. To begin our sacred work of reconciliation, we turn to the example of St. Francis of Assisi, who's known as a peacemaker and the patron of ecology, as well as the good ways, as the indigenous Dakota speak of it, of practicing of the practices of the native nations. Francis's wholesome regard for human dignity was demonstrated in his mutual exchange with the Muslim Malik al-Kāmil in 1219 during the Fifth Crusade. And today we Franciscans seek to sustain the highest regard for human dignity of the Dakota people by joining them in the sacred work of protecting the Creator's earth. Stated more philosophically, our basic conviction is that moral visionaries and religious events are transformative because each exemplary person and these occasions decenter and rearrange the ordinary, providing a renewed moral vision. As Catholics, we also see reconciling with the Dakota people as an opportunity for making such a shift, and in this case, for celebrating the common beliefs and practices. Together with the March 30, 2023 rescinding by the Vatican of the doctrine of discovery, why we Franciscans hope for a new beginning with our Dakota neighbors. The event of the Fifth Crusade in 1219 brought Francis and the Sultan Malik al-Kāmil together, and their immediate challenge was confronting the protracted imaginary of war-making against a religious enemy. What confronts us is no less life-threatening, namely a profound loss of dignity of our Dakota sisters and brothers, and also we confront the imminent ecocide, the ruin of Earth's ecosystemic capacities. We are especially challenged by the deep unrequited violations of colonization, land theft, and physical abuse, and even genocide. Both threats have the same spiritual root. Hopefully, together, we can strengthen spiritual bonds for social and ecological justice and sustainable well-being. A brief review of this exchange between the Sultan and the Saint signals personal qualities and shifts in attitudes and distinctive practices that are helpful guideposts for our current engagement. These expose the religious moral character of the two men and show how the horizons of each was enlarged. Those developments enable deep personal respect and lasting political peace. So again, the Fifth Crusade took place between 1217 and 1221, and this was a campaign in a series of crusades by Western Europeans to reacquire Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim control, first by conquering Egypt, which was ruled by the Ayyubid Sultanate. Sultan Malik al-Kāmil and Francis of Assisi were roughly the same age. In 1219, al-Kāmil was 39 and Francis of Assisi was 36 and a half. Malik al-Kāmil was a Kurdish ruler, the fourth Ayyubid Sultan of Egypt. The Ayyubid family was very strong on peacemaking. Al-Kāmil was subtle, philosophical, schooled in Christian ways, and thoroughly conversant with and observant of Islamic teachings and values. He established Islamic schools and was devoted to the great Sunni legal scholar Imam al-Shafi'i. Known to be fair-minded and generous, he enjoyed Friday night debates with learned people, and his trusted advisor, Fariq al-Farisi, a respected mystic and authority on the law. Giovanni Francesco di Bernardone, well, he actually was known more in his own time as Giovanni Pietro de Bernardone, the son of Peter Bernardone. But he was named Francesco because his father loved France, and when he was born, he was traveling, and so that was the nickname. The wealthy young man, Francis, led a carefree, frivolous, high-spirited life. At age 20, he fought in the war between Assisi and the Perugia city-state next to the Assisi. And he was taken prisoner at that time. Upon release, he suffered a long illness, but later he tried to become a knight. But prompted by a dream, he returned home. Midway, he met a leper, and he began a conversion process. He then began a life of prayer and caring for lepers. Many joined him, and by 1210, the Franciscan order rule was approved. Francis and these followers then practiced love, mercy, forgiveness, peace, rejecting any threat to human fraternity. Refusing to promote the Crusades, Francis made it its Tau cross. I'm wearing one. It's just a letter T, it almost looks like. And this became a sign of personal conversion and nonviolence. In September of, excuse me, in September of 1219, at the height of the Fifth Crusade, Al-Kāmil's troops were positioned to crush the Crusaders, but he offered them a proposal of peace. That was when Francis approached the Muslim camp, located outside of Damietta, Egypt, at the mouth of the Nile Delta. There are no official records of what actually happened there, but we have plenty of evidence of what happened after that and the character witnesses that knew the two men just in person. So what we know is this. Francis of Assisi likely gave his typical greeting, "May the Lord give you peace." And then he announced, "We are ambassadors of the Lord Jesus Christ. If you wish to believe us, we will hand you over your soul over to God. But if you die in the law which you now profess, you will be lost and God will not possess your soul." Al-Kāmil, on the other hand, would likely have appreciated the deference in that message, little that it was, and that Francis' greeting was similar to his own customary Assalamu alaikum. A faithful Muslim, he knew in the Holy Quran, the passage, "Say not to those who greet you with peace, you are not a believer." And he likely allowed Francis preaching because Christian monks are noted in the Holy Quran. Indeed, Francis's Christianity had many similarities with Sufi Islam. The men spent several days together, and Al-Kāmil offered Francis food, gold, silver, and silk. But Francis accepted only a farewell feast with the Sultan as a sign of Jesus' all-inclusive table fellowship. Before Francis left, the Sultan asked him to pray to the Lord for him so that he might be inspired by God to adhere to the religion which most pleased God. Then Al-Kāmil's honor guard escorted Francis to the Christian camp. Now, the Sultan's influence on Francis is readily seen in the saints' writings, and this is documented very carefully. So I'm just giving you the brief stuff here. And the Sultan's acts definitely honored Francis. Following his encounter with Francis, Al-Kāmil made multiple peace offerings, but they were refused by the Crusaders. On August 29th of 1221, when the Crusaders made their last stance for Damietta, Al-Kāmil withdrew his troops rather than perpetrate a slaughter. All prisoners were freed on both sides, and the relic of the true cross was returned. To ensure the peace would hold, Al-Kāmil included his own son and his sister's son as hostages. They threw a banquet for the Christian officers and fed the starving crusaders for 15 days. He also gave them safe passage out of Egypt and built a bridge across the Nile to speed up the crusaders' exit. Francis received tax-free access to the Holy Sepulchre, and there's much scholarly evidence of even more of the mutual reconciling encounter between Francis and the Sultan. Perhaps most telling from Francis's side is a prayer that Francis composed that's become known as the Chartula. In reprisal for their defeat at Damietta in April of 1222, the Christians allied themselves with Frederick II, and they began organizing, guess what? The Sixth Crusade. An attack on Muslim-held Holy Land was announced for April of 1225. But in August of 1224, Francis and his companions went to Mount Laverna, which is a mountain just outside of Assisi, for a 40-day fasting and prayer. While meditating on Jesus' passion on September 14th, Francis received the stigmata. Then, after the intensity of that event, Francis wrote what is known as a pictogram on parchment. The praises of God are on the front side, and the prayer of Aaron from Numbers 6:24-26, may the Lord bless and keep you, and it goes on. And a tau cross emerged from a recumbent head and a series of words appended to these drawings. And Francis gave this parchment to his secretary, Brother Leo, for safekeeping. Now, scholars hold that the turbaned head is Al-Malik al-Kāmil. The jagged outline around that's framing the recumbent head represents the Mediterranean Sea, and the turban head touches the place where it would have been the city of Damietta. The tau cross represents Francis, who had received the stigmata, and then the tau is above that and is communing with the Sultan Malik al-Kāmil. Now, at Mount Laverna, Francis and the brothers prayed what was known as the Lent of St. Michael, hoping to stop the bloodbath. St. Michael, you might know, is the patron of a military protector. And that he was praying for his Muslim brother, Malik al-Kāmil, aware of the imminent danger. Michael, the archangel, the guardian in battle, par excellence, was interceded to with intense prayer, and that the praises of God were also said with that. So you had the hope piece is there as well. The tau cross was a crusader symbol that protects and professes. But Francis adapted that tau cross, you'll recall, for his personal signature, a sign of personal conversion and a reminder to follow in the footprints of Jesus. So in God's presence, then, we have, in a life-threatening moment, Francis then honors his friend in the most intense manner imaginable. The parting request of his Muslim brother and friend at Damietta to pray for him so that he might be inspired by God to adhere to that religion which most pleased God. And it was in reality the only thing that Francis could do, because he simply had no weapons or anything like that, of course, obviously. So in reality, he did what he could do. And you'll notice that in the pictogram, there's the Latin for the words, I weep for you. Certainly, even amid fear and tears, for these friends and brothers in faith, at the very heart of every prayer that they uttered was Inshallah, or Inshallah, or God willing. So, as we move into a kind of a conclusion that brings about how all this connects to our process, Over 2 years ago, we, the Sisters of St. Francis, engaged in a preparatory process for formally seeking reconciliation and partnership with the Dakota neighbors. We used as our guidance the resource booklet from one of the indigenous not-for-profit groups entitled Partnering with Native Nations in a Good Way. And this governance center is not-for-profit, and it's located in another very holy place for the Dakota people, which is the intersection of the Mississippi River and the Minnesota River emptying into it. And sadly, we have Fort Snelling right there. But anyway, they've recovered some of that land for sacred ceremonies. So this is where we got our guidance from. And so prior to approaching the Dakota community and relying on Dakota sources, we Franciscans embarked on the study of accounts of Dakota history, spirituality, much of what I've just told you, as well as enculturated Christian theology from Black Elk, who is a Oglala Dakota saint, George E. Tinker, and Ben Black Bear Jr., among others. We are encouraged by coming to understand what seemed to be a close relationship between the 7 central Dakota values and virtues and those of Franciscan theologian St. Bonaventure, and as he prioritized the virtues. Those also harmonize well with the key principles of Catholic social teaching. Yet we realize this compatibility was not only ours to decide. Some of our younger members, myself included, recalled important learnings from years ago when the College of St. Teresa professor, Sister Mary Lonan Riley, in the spring semester of 1973, she offered the first accredited college course in the United States on Native American history. So we had a tiny little bit to go on. Yet, once again, we needed to reflect on our reality. We are part of the dominant white U.S. culture and have white privilege. And in spite of, but probably even because of, our vow of poverty, we Franciscans are all highly educated, professional women, intimately connected to a powerful global ecclesiastical institution. No matter how hard we try to distance ourselves from that, our worldview is affected by that reality. In addition, our community administration, healthcare, living, meeting, and retirement places are in the center, built on Dakota land. Moreover, historically, we are intimately institutionally connected with the famous Mayo Clinic, the place, you will recall, where in 1862, the bodies of some of those 38 Dakota warriors who were hung at Mankato were taken to be dissected by medical students. Though recently these bodies have been returned to the Dakota and properly buried, we must never forget that happened. All in all, we sought to take on a mindset of humble listening, openness, and patient willingness to sustain a long-term process over time. We spent several months reflecting spiritually and theologically so that we might be able to listen well. As we then approached the Dakota community leaders to engage in a process of reconciliation and hopefully building a renewed partnership. We chose to err on the side of formality as we sought a time and a place to meet with the Dakota leaders. We used formal titles of the officers and surnames of the persons that we addressed as individuals. We were advised that if relationships developed in a good way, we would soon be invited to more informal ways. So with that in mind, our president and director of our Spirituality Center, contacted the Dakota Leadership Council. Fortunately, our reputation for goodwill and partnering with others in the community in fair and just ways was known, and the leaders agreed to work with us. We agreed first to work toward a land acknowledgement statement, and then perhaps later to even participate in conversations about repatriation of some of the land parcels in other parts of Minnesota, and that's already begun. Fortunately, we had learned something of the Dakota Protocol for making our first personal contact. Our leaders brought some offerings that signaled our respect for the Dakota leaders being concerned and making time to meet. While traditionally the offering was of tobacco, the usual gift, ours were deemed acceptable gifts of herbal medicine, tea, and homegrown foods. I didn't mean to go there yet. Just a minute. I touched this with my hand. And then with the area of incentives, we demonstrated that we could be trusted by not coming to the Dakota leaders with a pre-planned agenda. Rather, we invited their initial input and then in turn invited them as Dakota leaders to present educational events at our spirituality center, to make use of our meeting spaces, or to make use of office equipment when preparing their events. For whatever ways we might speak about the Dakota people, we will use their data and resources or respectfully offer them the opportunity to critique our sources. It is their story, not ours, and they return the same respect for us. The whole notion of peer review will be honored. It is wonderfully pleasant to learn that the 7 Dakota virtues harmonize well with our Franciscan charism. Those virtues define how the Dakota live as families in their country and as individuals. Each person grows in these virtues over a lifetime. First is prayer, is the way they speak to Wakantanka, the Creator, and the 4 medicines of tobacco, cedar, sage, and sweetgrass are sacred and are used to give thanks to Wakantanka. Second is wisdom, that begins with the Dakota elders who teach the newborns and the children to understand and to recognize family, teaching through observation, words, and emotions. The elders know and have knowledge that transcends generations. Third is respect, and this is for all living beings that Wakantanka has created, the sky above us, the plants, the animals, the birds, the water, the air, the fire, oneself, family, our neighbors, and all nations. Fourth is generosity and helping, and this is to offer aid and assistance for betterment of our people and for our neighbors, other nations, and all of creation. Our character, they say, is measured by how well we take care of one another. Fifth is humility. As part of the Dakota worldview, when they understand that all are related, we as all people acknowledge that we must be one small part of the universe. Sixth is caring and compassion, and this is understood as a spiritual feeling that comes from the heart. It means to help one another and to care for the well-being of all things, or to teach and reach out to those needing help to make life better. And then seventh, honesty and truthfulness is believing in and trusting one's word and actions, being true to oneself, one's family, and others, and being sincere in your deeds and all things. Now, these values are passed on from generation to generation by an oral tradition. And they've always been held as importance to the Dakota people, and throughout time they will continue on beyond today. As for the Franciscan side of this, the love-oriented virtue ethics framework of Franciscan theologian St. Bonaventure is known as the Imitatio Christi, or simply imitating Christ. We must learn how to live morally by studying the whole life of Jesus, the Word incarnate, explained in the Gospels and interpreted through the life of St. Francis. Following Jesus takes us on to spiritual transformation. There is a constant interplay between our being and doing good and the process of becoming good. In these two ways, God graces and assists us in the moral life. And central to this transformation are the virtues of humility, poverty, obedience, and love. And just briefly, humility is the virtue central to the God-human relationship. God, in the Incarnation, entered into our reality, choosing to imitate and to have a relationship with us. We are not God. We must embrace prudence and the precautionary principle and use our limited scientific and technological prowess to care for one another and the planet. Poverty. Bonaventure held that material poverty, or Christian simplicity, must go hand in hand with humility. Today, we must choose to live with what is sufficient for a life of dignity and ecologically sustainable. Confident in God's generosity, we must live with open hands and heart, ready to give away, and we can never do too much for another. Obedience. Jesus attended to his Father's will and cared for all creatures. And today we must heed the groaning and suffering of the earth and become ecologically literate, prayerful, and discerning caretakers of the planet. And then finally, love. Having first received God's love, humans must share it with all of creation. Christ is the ultimate norm and negotiator of what is just love. We must show how our love today is a reality by enforcing policies that keep air, water, and soils pure and that sharply restrict planetary plundering. And now we actually were able to celebrate. Unfortunately, our video that really shows all the drumming and dancing and everything that we did is in a position on the internet that we cannot download it to show it to you. But I'm going to give people the links, and hopefully at another point in time why you'll be able to have access to it, because it really was a wonderful celebration. I've got some pictures that I'm going to show you, but first I wanted to read just the acknowledgement, and you see it on the screen. We acknowledge with great respect that the sacred lands of Assisi Heights on which we live and make our home are the cultural and spiritual lands of the Dakota and Ho-Chunk peoples. As Franciscans, we honor the lands and creatures as kin. We recognize the Catholic Church's involvement in unresolved legacy of colonial settler domination and unjust impact and forced assimilation on our Indigenous sisters and brothers. We realize that we share this land between us and commit to live in balance and harmony with Mother Earth and all her beings as we educate ourselves and build genuine relationships that support Indigenous sovereignty and help restore justice. And so with that, there was drumming and dancing. I think we went on for an hour. It was October. It was cold. We had winds that were, taking our breath away almost as we moved. But here are some pictures. The first one up here was a drumming ceremony that we were just calling all of the creatures and spirits together in our presence. The lower one is the act of what is known as smudging. It's sweetgrass that's dried, and the smoke of it is brought to each person, and one's invited to. It's a kind of an act of purification and repentance. And then on the positive side of this, you know, Minnesota is very cold even yet in October, just like up here in Canada. And so we had sweetgrass plants, and ordinarily we would have planted that together. But we had this kind of trough-like flower bed piece that, and so the women here are planting sweetgrass. And then there's some other herbs that were given to us that are part of more the medicine side of things. And so we do have gardens, and you saw at the flyover probably some of the places. So that's kind of the way our party ended, but I sure wish I could share the drumming with you because it was just phenomenal. But anyway, thank you for your attention. I know this got kind of long, but I think it's so important it was for us to really uncover all of that very sadly, you know, just atrocious history and what it is that we really want to never again do. So thank you very much for your attention. Do you want to say anything? Or just...
Sister Dawn will take her own question.
He can say that. I let him. Anyway, okay. Well, I mean, seriously, I would love to have a little conversation if you're interested in more. I know it got a little later with my...
About 20 kilometers south of here.
Yes.
Are some of the descendants of the people that you're talking about who were displaced from your area.
Yes.
And they settled here and have become leaders in their ability to recover, not only economically but also to rebuild their people by working on the language and their cultural backgrounds. Very small community, Whitecap, Dakota, and they have shown Saskatchewan people in Canada that how much can be accomplished by establishing partnerships with governments, municipalities, and organizations. They're an amazing example that many First Nations are looking at for mentoring.
Oh, thank you so much for telling me that. I appreciate it very much. Yeah.
So I just wonder if you could kind of distill for us the sort of the principles of peacemaking that were embodied by Francis of Assisi and the Sultan, was it Al-Malik?
Yeah.
Like, can you give us 5 different principles that you could then take and use elsewhere?
Yeah, I you know, I think the fundamentals really are, you know, the deep respect for the fact that we humans are creatures first and foremost, and that, you know, from the Christian side as well as from the Islamic side, that there's profound love of God, and that our whole existence is dependent there. And if we really live into that, then follows, you know, some of the things of humility and caring and all the other things that, you know, that we are, you know, basically taught by God. And, you know, if through Christian Islamic dialogue in greater detail, we'll find that the characteristics of Allah and what we as Christians would claim are right there. Same thing. You know, so it is the really the focus, you know, on, you know, the monotheistic God, you know, for us, you know, that this is you know, that dimension, that's where the power and authority is, and that our work spiritually and with one another is to stay attuned to that as the model. And for us as Christians, of course, that the primary model is Jesus Christ. And so, for Franciscans, in the writings of Francis of Assisi, the most frequently quoted gospel is the Gospel of John, and of course that's known as the Gospel of Love. So that is really quite central. So I think that's about as brief as I can make it.
Thank you for the presentation. I know the Ayotte brothers would have been very pleased with this speech. Right, what you presented here, quite moving, many of the things you had to talk about. What I'd like to ask you is did you have resistance from within your order, within the church, and did you have resistance from surrounding communities to the works of reconciliation you were doing? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, but it's hard to describe. Part of it was just really not knowing the history, and once people, Minnesota, like I think I've heard the stories from what you've done here in Canada in different places, maybe not so much maybe in your own space, but you really have to recover that history. Because if you've got the dominant, especially white society, you tell the good stories. You don't tell, And just the example of in Mankato, Minnesota, where those 38 people were killed and hung, they finally last year have a monument that really tells the real story there. We had schools in those areas, not for Indigenous Native people, but the Catholic community had schools. And in those history classes in those schools, they did not tell the full Minnesota history story like I told it to you tonight. And so a lot of that, the Diocese of Winona, Rochester, it's on the map, it's the lower two counties of the state of Minnesota. That whole area, that school system is now telling a updated history, for example. And so in that process, yes, what do we have to rewrite well, here's the real facts. And, well, how do you know? And it got to be, there's a lot of, I'm going to say it out loud, there's a lot of Republicans in the southern Minnesota. And you know who is the head of the Republican Party these days. But it's really, I think nobody likes to have bad stories told about the bad things we do. We want to put out the good things that we do. And when the perception of what is good and evil, remember, that's why all along the way I said, nobody bothered to think about this because, they were coming from some pretty rough stuff. Luxembourg was in a really bad space when a mother, Mary Alfred Mose and her family, came to the United States. So you're weighing good against good, and it ends up being, that's where the conflict. And even in this place, that I showed you in this, one of the first slides, with that Google Maps thing, where you can see very clearly on that one slide. I don't know if I can find it fast enough here. No, it's not. But anyway, here, like this. Here you see the red tile roof, so that's the place that we really have. But this whole green wooded area, and you'll notice there's already in here, there's a housing encroachment into that area. Now, they know that they desecrated tombs there when they built those houses. But did they bring in, geologists or not geologists? What's the word? The historical people that did all the stuff and figured out what they were really digging up when they dug up the pottery or whatever else? No, it just was a bunch of rocks, So that's where the initially the city of Rochester at least started making some limitations on what could be done and what kind of permitting they had to do before they could build. So that stopped the encroachment. But because it was one of these places where the big heavy hand of the law came down, you know, of course there's resistance from some people. And you know, Rochester is a very wealthy city. We have lots of poor people coming in, and especially we have, you know, from the border, you've heard in the southern border, we've got all kinds of folks. They're coming to Rochester, Minnesota. And this is the first time when this part of the United States has really started to experience the pressures of legal immigration. Why? Because we have now really poor people. You know, and so there's that, and then that gets all mixed up in this, you know. So anyway, I know we're getting short of time probably. I'd love to have more conversation if you have any other things.
The story you told us really resonates with an example here in not far from Saskatoon, where the Mennonites and the Lutherans came together with the young Chipewyan people who had been removed from their land in early 1900s, and how they achieved a level of understanding with each other that resonate with what you've described as necessary elements of reconciliation. It's knowing the story, willing to listen, and prayer is central to that. Prayer and ceremony is central to that, and it really is a unique experience for us in this area to have, you know, groups like the Mennonites sit and smoke the pipe with the young Chipewyan people, and they have become advocates for the young Chipewyans' claim for compensation from the federal government.
Yeah, just along that line, in the state of Minnesota, we have a good democratic governance in Minnesota right now. The governor and both houses, and so they're really doing some of the real hard work of, you know, like some of the places where they've been called reservations, but now they're returning. And even what had become state park land is now being returned back to the indigenous people. In the northern part of the state, there's another group that you know, initially were in that northern part of the state, but nonetheless, you know, they tend to be some of the Potawatomi people and that whole grouping, that the Ojibwe peoples. But it's exciting to see that there's enough you know, pressure from citizens to elect people that are going to be doing that. So I think that's where we're drawing a lot of hope as well, and it just really takes everything to make this happen. And I think you know, people of faith, you know, religious people of all faiths really have been part of putting the pressure to make as much as we can some kind of you know, reconciliation or repayment of in any way we can, or open benefits that people really need that have never been had. You know, I mean, the whole thing of religious freedom was taken away in the 1860s. You know, it's like, come on, what, you know. But so yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. It's been a good long day, but we had a lot of good stuff, and I know that I can see some people. I myself, I just think, you know, if I were sitting in your seat, I'd say, "Shut up, lady." Thanks.
So I was hoping for a little more time to write my thank you, but that's okay. One of the reasons that Sister Dawn is greatly admired in our field, which I'll talk about here in a second, is her connectedness and her down-to-earth nature, in spite of, or also perhaps because she is very wise. So it's wonderful. You can always understand what she's talking about, which is not always the case for me. I'll tell you that much. So I just want to say, by way of thank you, just highlight a few points as we're meant to do. But just start by saying that that thanking Sister Dawn really truly is a privilege. She is a leader in our field of eco-theology and in ecological ethics in particular. As Dawn helped to show us in this presentation, the Franciscan charism extends across concerns of integral ecology. These are concerns for just relationships with our human and ecological neighbor, of seeing that social and ecological approaches have to come together, and of growing peace within that context of interconnectivity. So I really saw that as active in your presentation. We saw, for instance, in the video that peace is literally written into the landscape at Assisi Heights. And you can do things like that, but what's really important is to bring it alive. And we saw aspects of how that's brought alive in your presentation. I'd say that that's a peace-building methodology from my peace studies side. It's done in the name of joining together. It's done in the spirit of caring for common causes. And in this case, the common cause is particularly poignant and meaningful to the field that the Ayotte brothers help support us learning about. And that's joining together to walk in a common way, protecting Mother Earth in the service of our conference theme of engaging diversity and caring for the common good. Significant is also the spirit in which you do that. And I love that image of St. Francis as having this sort of dual role of peacekeeper and patron for ecology. And that's something that's really important. And that's why I ran out of time writing the thank you. But the other thing that it really, I think is important is the way that you talked about privilege. And we accrue privilege even if we don't want to accrue privilege. And what do you do when you realize that, you become conscious of it, this process of conscientization that we talked about. And you can be paralyzed by that. You can choose to ignore it. But I think that one of the things that I find special about your work in general and the Franciscan charism and many of the powerful Green Sisters that I know is they choose not to ignore that. They choose to do something. And we saw, humble steps. We saw how the Dakota virtues come together with the Franciscan charism and undertaking that in that spirit. And that's something that's really inspirational. And I think it's something that helps make Catholicism relevant today. So thank you very much, Sister Dawn. We have a small token of our appreciation for you that we'll present you with. As Dawn's coming up to receive her nice present, I'll just remind you that we have a reception in her honor that will be in the atrium, and we'd like to invite you to join in a more informal dialogue with Sister Dawn and other conference attendees, along with some really interesting people that I know that are in the crowd here that will have more things to say. So that's it for tonight, and we're done before 9 this part, and you can make your way down. You should all have time for snacks and socialization. Yeah.